I am the eldest son, and you knew that living with my mother would be a possibility when we got married, didn't you? You never mentioned that when we first tied the knot. My husband Robert had moved in with my mother-in-law earlier than his sister, and after selling his family home, he left me with the sole responsibility of taking care of her. I'm a stay-at-home wife, and he must have planned this for a long time. My name is Laura, and I'm a 46-year-old housewife. Robert is 44 and works for a decent company as a subsection manager, often boasting about his Ivy League education. We have 2 sons, making us a family of 4. But now, with our youngest son having graduated from college this summer and moved out, my husband has started acting on his own. We're going to take in my mom soon, he declared. Hearing this for the first time, I was shocked. My mother-in-law lost her husband, my father-in-law, last year. Considering they did everything together, I had been concerned about how deeply this loss must have affected her. But living together suddenly, anyone would be surprised. Robert implied that I had plenty of time since I'm a stay-at-home wife. He instructed me to visit my mother-in-law every day and talk to her. I argued that daily visits might exhaust her, but Robert's aim was clear. He wanted us to get along through frequent visits, making it easier for him to implement his plan of us living together. My mother-in-law's house is a stylish, standalone home built by my late father-in-law in a popular suburban area of Chicago. If put up for sale, there would certainly be many buyers willing to pay a great price. Robert had his eyes on this house. By living with my mother-in-law, he wanted to gain the right to do whatever he pleased with it. A few days later, Robert came home looking irritated. Apparently, his sister had contacted him. "You have been visiting my mom, haven't you?" he said, roughly throwing his coat at me. "Yes, about once every 3 or 4 days, I replied, hanging his carelessly thrown coat on a hanger. "My sister visited Mom today for the first time in a while," Robert said, his tone sharp. "She said the entire house was a mess from the kitchen to the bathroom. You have been cleaning up over there, haven't you?" I was irritated by his insinuation that I might be lounging around and snacking while visiting my mother-in-law. "Of course I've been helping with the chores and shopping. I've even organized the fridge before leaving," I said, trying to keep my composure. Robert laughed scornfully. "Well, I guess this is the most I can expect from a housewife," he said, glancing around the living room. It hadn't been long since our youngest son moved out, so the room wasn't spotless, but it was far from being messy enough to disrupt our daily lives. Robert has a nasty habit of nagging me about being a full-time housewife whenever he's in a bad mood. He always picks on the smallest things. If I stay silent, he assumes he's won the argument and his mood improves as he believes he's triumphed. I often wonder if belittling me is really that satisfying for him. When he comes home tired from work, he demands, "Get my dinner out on the table already." Seriously, can't you do anything without me telling you? This was typical of Robert, always trying to assert his dominance. One day, I received a call from my sister-in-law. She had apparently had a conversation with Robert and told me, "Robert insists that if he moves in with Mom, he should be able to sell the house and keep all the money for himself." "Laura, are you planning to move in?" She offered to take our mother-in-law, and if I had any hesitations about living with her, I told her we had just started discussing the possibility recently. She responded as if she had her own schemes in mind. "So it's not confirmed yet then," and hung up. When I told Robert about this conversation, he became furious. "Why did you reveal our plans without asking me?" he barked. I replied, "This is about discussing our mother's future, isn't it? You make it sound like a property dispute." He gave me a scornful look and sneered, "I really hate dealing with idiots who can't think straight." This is the real dynamic of our relationship. Robert belittles me for being a housewife and a high school graduate, always trying to make me submit to him. When we got married, I was drawn to his confidence and reliability, but those traits have morphed into what I loathe about him. What's worse, he occasionally boasts about marrying an older woman, mocking me for being 2 years older and not having a college degree. He pushed me into being a housewife, claiming no one would want to hire a high school graduate. Ever since our children moved out, I've been feeling more and more stress about my interactions with Robert. To be honest, I feel like I've reached my limit with this marriage. Robert, oblivious to my feelings, likely wants to move in with his mother as soon as possible, probably aiming to pocket all the money from selling her house. He doesn't seem to consider how his parents might feel about their home being sold or the memories they've built there. Amid these conflicting family interests, I encountered a shocking reality. It began with a call from my mother-in-law, who had sprained her ankle. She said her room was a mess and needed help cleaning it up. Although several days had passed since my sister-in-law's last visit, I figured that's what she was talking about the other day, so I responded lightly, "Sure, I'll come over." It didn't seem like she had informed Robert, but she assured me I didn't need to let him know either. So I visited her the following day with a light heart. I rang my mother-in-law's doorbell and heard her shout, "It's open," from the yard. I turned the knob and stepped inside. An unpleasant odor was immediately noticeable. Dust had accumulated in the corners of the corridor, and towels and discarded socks were scattered around. The stench grew stronger as I entered the living room, where a stack of cushions was piled on the sofa. "Mom, are you here?" I murmured, wondering if she had gone somewhere. Then I heard, "I'm here," and followed the voice. I found my mother-in-law buried in the cushions on the couch, which seemed to be adjusted for comfort. The cushions were piled so high that I hadn't noticed her at first. "Excuse me, Mom, are you all right?" I called out as I approached her. The peculiar smell grew stronger. Trying not to gag from the smell, I searched for its source. "I'm okay. I just piled up the cushions because it's comfortable." She laughed heartily. I realized the source of the smell was my mother-in-law herself. With all my might, I tried not to pinch my nose and asked, "How's your leg? Were you unable to bathe because it was inconvenient?" She replied, Yes, about that. I healed quickly, but after a few days of not bathing due to the pain, I couldn't be bothered to take a shower. Do I smell?" I refrained from answering directly and said, "I will clean up," then proceeded to open all the windows in the house. My mother-in-law certainly needed a thorough bath. Thinking this, I headed to the bathroom. The bathtub was filled with some water and left as is, with a lid half submerged. Soap scraps and towels were muddy in the wash basin, and the mirror was foggy and dirty. I couldn't remember the last time it had been cleaned. I wondered if my sister-in-law hadn't visited recently. How could this place be neglected for so long? For now, I cleaned the bathroom, filled the tub with fresh water, added some lemon bath salts for fragrance, and told my mother-in-law, "I've just cleaned the bathroom and prepared a bath for you. Please take a bath first. Meanwhile, I'll air out these cushions." The kitchen was in an appalling state, but the rest of the rooms only had a few layers of accumulated dust. The kitchen, however, looked as though roaches might be lurking around. Bracing myself, I cleaned it until it was spotless. "That was refreshing," my mother-in-law said as she returned to the living room. Her cheeks flushed like a boiled lobster, glowing from having days of built-up grime washed off. Because I had been cleaning like crazy, the living room and kitchen were mostly tidied up, and she was very pleased with the result. Finally, in the clean living room, I asked her, "Mom, you were always so tidy and organized. What happened all of a sudden?" Ever since I got married, my mother-in-law had always been neat and her house was well maintained. It was surprising to see her place in such a state, to the point where she needed to call for help. She sighed and said, "Did you notice that I just used my injured foot as an excuse? I've been living with my husband for decades, doing my best as a wife and mother. But last year, after my husband passed away, I felt a sudden sense of freedom." Her children were already independent and married. With her husband no longer with her, she wanted to slack off and do nothing for once. She continued, "I also know that the kids want to sell this house, and it could escalate into a nasty fight over it. But I have an idea." My mother-in-law gave me an intense stare, out of her usual character, as she shared her thoughts. As I listened to her, I felt like we were on the verge of something important. I had been idling away, lost in thought, trying to find answers. Leaving her house, I began to think about my own future as well. My relationship with my mother-in-law had always been as distant as a typical daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationship. However, the fact that she revealed her lowest self to me, rather than to her biological daughter or son, felt indicative of her feelings. Days passed without sharing this incident with anyone. Then one evening, my husband Robert came home from work and blurted out, "We're going to invite my mom to live with us." As I was watching TV, I asked him to repeat himself. "We're inviting my mom to move in with us." "And what does your mom think?" I asked. "There's no need to ask her," he said. He seemed to think that any parent would be happy if their child offered to have them move in. You should check with your mom first instead of just making decisions on your own, I suggested. In response, he smirked and turned around. What a high and mighty thing to say for a stay-at-home wife. Don't forget, if you can't obey what I say, divorce is always on the table. Seeing his face, I felt at my wit's end. He knew that, as a housewife nearing my 50s, I wouldn't be able to make it on my own if we divorced, which is why he was threatening me. He was attempting to stir up my anxiety and manipulate me at his will. But I had an unexpected savior, and unbeknownst to my husband, my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I ignored his provocative comment, finished dinner, and went to bed. My husband, feeling that he had completely cornered me with his divorce threat, was in a good mood. He was probably thinking of inviting his mother as planned, sweet-talking her into selling her house, and pocketing all the money for himself. The next morning, however, everything changed. I packed my belongings and left the house. When Robert came home to find an empty house, he seemed startled and began calling me incessantly. I read his incoming messages without responding, just to ensure he wouldn't cause any trouble by reporting me to the police. One of his messages read, "Are you so against living with my mom? But if we live together, that house will be ours. Don't you see how great that would be?" My suspicion was right. His interest wasn't in staying with his aging mother to support her, but rather in profiting off her house. I shared this with my mother-in-law. She looked a little sad, and it pained me a bit, but she seemed determined and said she would act according to her feelings. Yes, the place I went after leaving my husband was my mother-in-law's house. I took on a job and used her place as my base. Robert, growing anxious since I wasn't responding, blew up my phone with calls and texts. After a week, he contacted my family in Nebraska, and I got a call from my mom. "Laura, where are you? Robert claims that you're with us. He even said he's going to come get you, even though I told him you're not here." I explained the situation to my mother and informed her that I was currently staying at my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law then took the phone, offering a long greeting. For some reason, my mother gave me a word of encouragement, wishing me the best of luck. Eventually, my mother-in-law said, "It's about time," and that night she called my husband. Robert was surprised to learn from his own mother that I was not at my parents' house and immediately came over. "Leaving the house so abruptly, I had no idea you were at Mom's. What's this about?" Robert blurted out the moment he saw me. Before I could even answer, my mother-in-law spoke up. "More than that, do you even understand why Laura left home?" Taken aback by her sudden question, Robert awkwardly replied, "Well, that was because I said I wanted to invite Mom over. Because she didn't want to live with you, right?" "Why would I be here if I didn't want to live with my mother-in-law?" "Ever thought about that? You see, it wasn't the idea of moving in with her that I disliked. What I hated was you making selfish decisions without considering others' feelings." I continued, "My mother-in-law has her own thoughts and hopes, you know. Despite this, you decided on living together without even discussing it with her. You didn't even consider the feelings of your parents when they built this house. You just want this house because you want the money, right?" Robert clenched his fists and hardened his body, looking down as he listened to our conversation. My mother-in-law continued after me, "What do you really need this house for, Robert? Or is it Laura? If you don't change, you'll lose both. Why don't you cool down for a while and rethink everything?" Hearing this from his own mother, Robert, who had been quietly listening, suddenly kneeled to the ground in front of us. I was taken aback and asked, "What's this about?" "I apologize to Laura and to you, Mom," Robert said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Please, I want to live together again and start anew." Raising his head from his bow, Robert continued, "Mom, will you live with us?" As Robert bowed down again, I looked at my mother-in-law and we shared a knowing smirk. After that, I resumed my life with Robert, but this time, I wasn't a stay-at-home wife anymore. My mother-in-law told her friends about how I deep-cleaned her room, transforming it from a mess from the time she spent lazing around into a sparkling space in just a couple of hours. I continued, "My mother-in-law has her own thoughts and hopes, you know. Despite this, you decided on living together without even discussing it with her. You didn't even consider the feelings of your parents when they built this house. You just want this house because you want the money, right?" Robert clenched his fists and hardened his body, looking down as he listened to our conversation. My mother-in-law continued after me, "What do you really need this house for, Robert? Or is it Laura? If you don't change, you'll lose both." Why don't you cool down for a while and rethink everything?" Hearing this from his own mother, Robert, who had been quietly listening, suddenly kneeled to the ground in front of us. I was taken aback and asked, "What's this about?" "I apologize to Laura and to you, Mom," Robert said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Please, I want to live together again and start anew." Raising his head from his bow, Robert continued, "Mom, will you live with us?" As Robert bowed down again, I looked at my mother-in-law and we shared a knowing smirk. After that, I resumed my life with Robert, but this time, I wasn't a stay-at-home wife anymore. My mother-in-law told her friends about how I deep-cleaned her room, transforming it from a mess from the time she spent lazing around into a sparkling space in just a couple of hours. When I mentioned this to my friends, many of them said they wanted me to do the same for their homes. I was amazed and delighted to find that I could apply my housekeeping skills from being a stay-at-home wife to start a new job. I also began studying to become a storage advisor. It seemed that Robert had not given up on the idea of living with his mother, selling their house, and getting a large amount of money. He seemed to think that it would become a reality now that my mother-in-law and I were getting along. But there was a surprise announcement from my mother-in-law. Surprisingly, she was getting remarried. "So, I won't be living with you, and I won't be giving up my house either," she said. Upon hearing the news, my sister-in-law congratulated her, although with mixed feelings. I sent my sincere blessings for my mother-in-law's decision. The one who was surprised by my mother-in-law's words and screamed out in shock was Robert. At the same time, he was frantically contacting various people. Apparently, Robert had taken a boating license without telling me and even purchased a small cruiser, counting on the money from selling his parents' house. Now that his plans had fallen apart, Robert was unable to cancel his order for the cruiser, and he seemed to have to work even harder than before. He ended up having to help me with my house cleaning job. As an employer, I'm drilling household chores to Robert and guiding him to clean and polish a great number of my clients' houses.